Alright, so now the 414th prediction for the two fire signs of 1 Kings 18. All we've done is we've moved the second fire sign to be coincident with the third. So they're both now happening on Sivan 2021, which is June the 12th to the 14th, which is the Sabbath is Sivan 20 and the day after the Sabbath Sivan 21. So it's Friday, June the 12th to Sunday, June the 14th. During that period we're expecting a mushroom cloud over the Thames around about Dartford due to an attack on the UK, and a mushroom cloud above the Hudson somewhere around George Washington Bridge due to an attack on Manhattan. And these two attacks begin World War III, which is the sudden destruction that instantly stands upon those saying peace and security in 1 Thessalonians 5:3. And the sentence counts on that is 9 times, which is kind of cryptically because of 9 months, but an instant destruction isn't 9 months. And it isn't unexpected that you get a baby 9 months after you conceive. So it's 9 days. The unexpected birth pain happens in the month when you expect the baby, but you don't know when, and of course it comes when you least expect it during that month. And so it's a matter of days, not months. So 9 days before the beginning of World War III, which is Sivan 21, which is June 13-14, after both of those fire signs, because the third fire sign actually must happen at the Pentecost, which is the 7th 2NC Pentecost, which is this year. Because the first was Heshvan 21, 2019, and then Chislev Tebeth, not Shabbat because it's in a Sabbath year, and then Adar, Nisan, Iyar, Sivan is 7. And so it's the 7th 2NC Pentecost, and it's of the 7th year of Zoa after our installation over the 2 NCs. And there's got to be a fire sign at the Pentecost according to Acts 2, when there's a violent explosion at the Pentecost and a report from heaven of a violent explosion. So that's now Sivan 21. But that begins World War III, the third fire sign. And then 9 days prior to that is peace and security declared, which will be Sivan 12, which is Thursday evening to Friday evening in 3 or 4 hours time, in the UK at least. Interesting time to declare it in the face of all these lawless riots on the pretext of one cop's brutality. There's always a pretext when there's abuse. It's never the fault of the abuser, it's always the fault of the victim. It's your fault. You got white privilege, it's your fault. That's why I'm beating you up, that's why I'm shooting you, that's why I'm looting you. It's your fault. That's how abuse works. Well, the kingdom of God will end all that abuse, and it's appointed in 4 months' time on Tishri 16 and installed 50 days later on Chislev 5, which is not far off. But it all comes down, this contest, to the correct definition of a super Pentecost and the correct interpretation of 1 Kings 18, 36, 37, 38, 39, 40 to 44, joined up with 2 Kings 1, which refers to the same events, with the chief of the second 50 relating to the fire signs of 1 Kings 18, which is Pentecostal, full of 50s. And the new idea I've got for that is that, well, it's not new, it's a refinement of the old idea. Okay, so the definition of a Pentecost in Leviticus 23 is that you should count 7 Sabbaths from the day after the Sabbath, from the day of your bringing the sheaf of the wave offering, which is first fruits. They should prove to be complete. Then it says, to the day after the 7th Sabbath, you should count, which has already been said, in the sense that you've already counted 7 Sabbaths. And then they're saying, well, you should count 7 Sabbaths. So the definition is, you should count 7 Sabbaths after first fruits. Then it says, you should count 7 Sabbaths and then go to the day after that. And he says 50 days you should count, which is counting 7 Sabbaths and going to the day after that. And you must present a new grain offering to Jehovah on the Pentecost. So it's triply redundant. It says you should count 7 Sabbaths, you should count 7 Sabbaths plus 1, and you should count 50 days, which is 7 Sabbaths plus 1. And it's deliberately written like that. If you were a pure mathematician, here's how you would define it. You count 7 Sabbaths and add 1. That would be the entire definition. You wouldn't say, you count 7 Sabbaths. You count 7 Sabbaths and add 1. You count 50 days. You wouldn't say that. You're saying the same thing 3 times. So the reason for that contorted and repetitive definition, indeed the reason for the entire contortion and repetitive nature of the whole Bible, is that it's saying 2 or 3 things with one set of words. And so what we do is, instead of having them as weekly Sabbaths, which is what was used in the definition for the Mosaic law, we take them as Pentecostal festival Sabbaths, which are also Sabbaths. I mean, it doesn't say you will count 7 weekly Sabbaths, it just says you count 7 Sabbaths. So if those Sabbaths are themselves Pentecosts, then you count 7 of those, and that takes you to the 7th annual festival, 7 years after your first fruits. Then it says, to the day after the 7th Sabbath, you should count. 50 days you should count. Now, you can take that as meaning the 50 days of your 7th annual Pentecost that you got to, having counted 7 of them. That would be taking verse 15 as Pentecostal Sabbaths and verse 16 as weekly Sabbaths. Or you can take both verses as Pentecostal Sabbaths. To do that, you will count 7 years, 7 annual Pentecost festivals. Then you will count 7 recitals of the 7th Pentecost. In other words, you get to the 7th 2 NC Pentecost if they're 2 NCs, or 1 NC Pentecost if they're 1 NCs. And that Pentecost is Sivan 21. But it's to the day after the 7th Sabbath you should count. 50 days you should count. Well, if your 7th Sabbath is a Pentecostal festival Sabbath, and in fact the 7th version of a Pentecost, the 7th instance of a Pentecost, in other words, the late Pentecost, and you add 1 more day to it, you wouldn't be at a Pentecost if it's a literal day. So you add 1 more Pentecostal day. 50 days you should count for the final day. It's a Pentecost, so that makes 8 Pentecosts. So actually that would be the definition, which is interesting. I mean, Sivan 21 is the 8th if you include Shabbat 21, which fell during the Sabbath month. Now, Shabbat 21 was not a 2 NC Pentecost because you can't hold a festival in the Sabbath month. But it was nonetheless the end of the 50 count. So as regards counting, it would be okay, but it wouldn't actually be a festival you'd celebrate. So I suppose from the definition, the 8th 2 NC Pentecost, counting from the first one in 2019, Heshvan 21, which you go back 7 times from 2012, Chislev 21, when we were appointed over the 2 NCs in Zoa, which is where you start the count. You start the count from a first fruits actually, which can be, it doesn't really matter, it could be the first fruits after our appointment, which would be Tebeth 2. All I'm doing is I'm substituting weekly Sabbath for annual Pentecostal festival Sabbath in verses 15 and 16 of Leviticus 23. And the question is, how do you do that correctly? And the answer appears to be that you count 7 annual festivals, that's 7 years, then you count another 7, which are 7 months, which is a further 7 festivals, and then you count to the next day, which has to be a Pentecostal day, which makes 8. So in other words, you go to the 8th instance of the 7th Pentecost, and that is Sivan 21, 2020. So that is our prediction for the 3rd fire sign. And also with the Pentecost, since you count actually 7th Sabbath and you count 50 days, both of them are in the definition. You can have a fire sign on the 7th Sabbath of the 8th instance of the 7th annual Pentecost from the installation. So have we got there? Okay, so you get installed. That's Elijah going up to the top of the mountain, Mount Carmel, Garden Land. You get installed over a true church in some capacity. Right, then you've got to go the day after that Pentecost, which is a first fruits after that Pentecost. Then you count 7 annual festival Sabbaths after that, which takes you 7 years after your installation, which takes you in our case to 2019 Heshvan 21, the regular 2NC Pentecost. Then you count to the day after the 7th version of that. And the 7th one is ER, if you count them all, is ER 21 2020, and the day after that, the Pentecostal Festival Day, is 2020 Sivan 21. And 50 days you count to that, which is 7 sevens plus 1. You could regard that as 7 incidences of each of the 7 Pentecosts. You know, you'd be counting 2012 Chislev 21 to 2013 Sivan 21, 7 instances of that Pentecost. And then you'd count 2013 Heshvan 21 to 2014 ER 21, 7 instances of that Pentecost, etc. up to 2019, where you count 8 incidences. And that would take you to Sivan 21, 2020. It's the generalization of Leviticus 23, 15 and 16, from weekly Sabbath to annual Pentecostal Festival Sabbath. And I believe that takes you to 2020 Sivan 21, which is our new prediction for the 2nd and 3rd fast signs, along with the 7th Sabbath of that Pentecost. Well, I'm going to recap that because I've only just worked it out. Alright, so here is how you reinterpret, or how you substitute, weekly Sabbath to be annual festival Pentecostal Sabbath in Leviticus 23, 15 and 16, the definition of a Pentecost. It says you must count for yourself from the day after the Sabbath, from the day of your bringing the sheaf of the wave offering, which is the first fruits day. So you get to the Sabbath, the 0th Sabbath, let's call it. Then you go to the first fruits after that Pentecost, because we're not taking it as a weekly Sabbath, we're taking it as a Pentecostal Sabbath. So it's a 2NC Pentecost. You then go to the first fruits after that, the 2NC first fruits after that, which will be a late, or late, whatever, 2NC first fruits. Then you count 7 Sabbaths, which are annual festival Pentecostal Sabbaths. It takes you 7 years forward. They should prove to be complete. Then he says, to the day after the 7th Sabbath you should count 50 days. And we interpret day here to be a Pentecost, unless it's specified as the day of your bringing a sheaf of a wave offering, in which case it's a first fruits. So you count 7 Pentecosts for each of the 7 Pentecosts that you've counted. In other words, you go to the first annual Pentecost after the first fruits after your 0th Pentecost, which will be a year later. You then count 7 instances of that festival, the regular, the late, the late, the late, the late, the late, the late, whatever, until you get to 7, which is the 7th one of them. And you do that 7 times. That takes you basically 49 Pentecosts on. Then you go to the Pentecostal Festival Day after that, which is 50 Pentecosts. So you're basically counting 50 Pentecostal festival days after your first fruits, after your 0th Sabbath, in circumstances where each year is allowed to have 7 incidences of a Pentecost, until the final year, the 7th year, which has 8. And the 8th Pentecost in the 7th year, that is where you end up. And that's 50 days, 50 Pentecostal festival days. So that's the definition. It's very, very different. Instead of just counting 50 days from a first fruits, you count 50 annual Pentecostal festival, and late, and late, late, and late, 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 and late, 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 and late, 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 and late, 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 late festivals, until you get to the 7th, when you add 1 more, and that gives you 50 Pentecostal festival days. And that takes you to 2020 Sivan 21, and that's what I've been seeking for 14 years since we started this contest. So the whole contest lasts 50-90 days from ER1 2006, when I sent the first letter to the Watchtower saying they were giving my first attempt at this, which was Sivan 11, and the actual fire sign will occur on 2020 Sivan 2021, which is 90 days after my letter, and actually 50 days, or 101 times 50 days after my first prediction, which was a Sivan 11. Which is interesting because it's many tekel in Pentecosts. And it's also interesting because there's 100 prophets hidden by Obadiah in cave 50 man to the cave. So 101 will be 100 prophets plus Obadiah hidden in 50s, hidden by 50s. You could argue that's 101 times 50, and that gives you the answer to the contest. If only I'd seen that 14 years plus ago. Anyway, so that's it. You're counting, instead of 50 days, you're counting 50 annual Pentecostal, 52NC Pentecost, or late Pentecost, or late Pentecost, or whatever, up to 7 per year and 8 in the 7th year. And that seems to be the definition of the super Pentecost that's eluded me for 14 years. But there again, Jacob had to work 2 lots of 7 years to get Rachel and Leah, and 20 years for the flock. And here we are, and the flock began in 2000, and we're now in 2020. Then going to 2 Kings 1, the second chief of 50 is Sivan 21. And he has to be an inclusive chief, because the fire sign consumes the 50 and the chief. And unlike the first fire sign, which was a fire burning in Mount Carmel in Israel, which could burn for several days and did burn for 4 days, it actually killed 44 people. It's the largest fire in the history of modern Israel. And that was the first fire sign, because this whole 1 Kings 18 was set on Mount Carmel. And it produced a rising mushroom cloud from the sea around Mount Carmel. And it covered the 2NC Pentecost, which was 2010 No, we took that as an inclusive chief too. In fact, they're all inclusive chiefs now of Pentecost. But they're exclusive in the Jubilee fulfillment of 2 Kings 1. 2 Kings 1 is about 50s and chiefs of 50s. And the whole trouble is the chief part of the 50 or is he not part of the 50? Because it's an ambiguity. You know, is the chief of 50 men the 51st man or the 50th man? You know, the head of a family is part of a family. So he could be part of his own 50 or it could be in addition to his 50. One doesn't know. It's the ambiguity, the deliberate ambiguity. And when you look at them as jubilees, it's 51 months times 2, it's 153 months. And that takes you from the first month of the sacred kingdom of God, which is 2008 ER1 starts. And it takes you to the third Jubilee, it's 150 months, that's Tishri 30, the end of that month. And then 3 more months after that is Heshvan Chislev Tebeth. And so Tebeth is the chief, the third chief of the third 50, exclusively, making 153 months, or 153 big fish of John 21. And that's the end of Adam, that month. But these are all inclusive, which they have to be in order that the fire sign can consume the 50 and the chief of 50. Because if they were exclusive, the fire sign would have to consume one of the 50 days of the count. And then the late count, 30 days afterwards, it would have to consume that. So it would have to span a period of a month. It would have to be a 30-day long fire sign, which is ridiculous. So they all have, the fire signs have to be inclusive in 2 Kings 1. So it's the 7th 2NC Pentecost, by which I don't mean the 7th 2NC Pentecost count, I mean the 7th 2NC Pentecost festival. The way you count a Pentecost is you ignore Sabbath month. So if you're counting the Pentecost, since Shabbat 2019 was a Sabbath month, when you have the first fruits on Teveth 2, that Pentecost, which is the 4th 2NC Pentecost, because Tishri, Heshvan, Chislev, Tebeth, you count it up to 7 Sabbaths. You count them up to the last Sabbath of Tebeth, and then you just ignore Shabbat, which is a Sabbath month in which you can't have a festival, and continue the count until Adar 21, basically. So instead of running from Tebeth to Shabbat, it runs from Tebeth to Adar. Or you can say, well, we'll count to Shabbat, which is the count, but we can't celebrate it in Shabbat, so we have to celebrate it in Adar. And then that's an interesting, but that's probably the right way to do it. However you do it, you end up celebrating Adar 21. Because you cannot count from Shabbat 2 to Adar 21, because Shabbat 2 isn't a first fruits because it's in a Sabbath month. So, however you do it, it jumps a month. And so from a counting standpoint, it's the 8th Pentecost, but from a celebratory standpoint, it's the 7th 2NC Pentecost. I think that's all we need to say. We've achieved a lot if we can finally understand what a super Pentecost is. So there we are. It's 50 annual Pentecosts and 7 late versions of each. 7 versions of each, which is 6 late versions and a regular version in each of the 7 years, and 8 of them in the 7th year. Alright, and so as a result of that, we're now predicting the 7th 2NC Pentecost, which is 2020June12-14, which is in 10 days' time, for the 3rd fire sign. And the 2nd fire sign could be on June 12, 13, 14. It could be on the 7th Sabbath of the 7th celebrated festival Pentecost, but the 8th counted 2NC Pentecost. I hope there's enough information in there for people to understand. It wasn't easy, but that I think is it. God bless and thank you.